so many new pieces to this IU football team.
To me, that's going to set the tone on how you get ready for games on Saturday in the fall.
I would put that Indiana room up against anybody else in the conference, and that's something that we typically don't even come close to saying.
If you want to get total sickos committee about it, there's a position battle at long snapper too.
This is the Hoosier Huddle Podcast, part of the College Huddle Podcast Network.
Good afternoon and welcome to the Hoosier Huddle Podcast. I'm Sammy Jacobs. Along with me is T.J. Inman as always, and we're here to break down spring practice, which starts Saturday, March 8th. And concludes on Saturday, April 19th with the annual spring game. Today we are talking about the Indiana Hoosiers offense. So we'll go through position by position and as detailed as we can, give you some key newcomers, some key losses and departures, and then who might surprise at each position. So TJ, welcome in. How are you doing today? And then we'll start with let's start with the quarterback.
Yeah, doing great. Exciting to be talking about the roster. Seems like it was just last week that we were, kind of deconstructing the season that was, and there is no off season as we know. It just churns right into recruiting and now the spring. And looking quarterbacks first, obviously replacing Curtis Rourke is a tall task, and it's not something that can be done in a like-for-like manner. But Indiana went out and got Fernando Mendoza, transfer quarterback from Cal. He was kind of rumored as a guy that if he entered would be high up on Indiana's target list, if not at the very top of it. And I think it makes a lot of sense. I mean, he's a little bit more mobile than Curtis Rourke, particularly, with Rourke not being healthy. So I think there's a little bit of that, but it's not like he's only a runner. I mean, he's got a very good arm, threw for over 3,000 yards with Cal. He enters the spring as the clear number one quarterback. Last season, so many unknowns, and one of those was, is Curtis Rourke healthy after, his injury in 2023? Is he healthy? And if so, is he going to beat out Taven Jackson? We thought so, but there was a little bit of uncertainty throughout the spring and into the fall. This year, that doesn't exist. We know Fernando Mendoza, barring injury, is going to be the starting quarterback for the Hoosiers. After that is where it gets, a little bit interesting. Grant Wilson, another transfer, a veteran guy that, wants to get into coaching and thought that this would be a really good opportunity to, one, play for a program that he views in high esteem. Two, coming from Old Dominion, he, knows the coaching staff enough and I think has a belief in what they're doing with Sunbelt players. And then two, he's a veteran guy that maybe views this as an opportunity to play for a winning team in his last year. And then he's going to be battling with Fernando's younger brother, Alberto. So I think the spring is going to be used, one, establish comfortability for Fernando Mendoza with his wide receivers and within the offensive system. And then two, determine what that pecking order behind him might look like.
Yeah, IU loses both Curtis Rourke, Taven Jackson, which, and Tyler Cherry is somebody we don't talk about too. Tyler Cherry, I mean, he's still an Indiana Hoosier. However, he's now a student coach. And in a clever roster management move, they took him off the roster and made him a student coach to recover from a knee injury that he suffered in CFP practices,
right,
and he should be ready to go in 2026. That kind of blows up the blueprint you kind of had for him going into 2026. But spring practice, like you said, TJ, it's a chance for Fernando Mendoza to get used to his receivers, but it's also a chance to build that quarterback depth. Grant Wilson has played a lot of football. He is coming off an
Yeah.
injury. Um, Alberto Mendoza got into a few games. And then does Jacob Bell, who's the incoming freshman, um, look, if I use playing Jacob Bell in games in meaningful minutes, they're in trouble anyway. But I think Fernando Mendoza is going to have a successful year. You know, Cal's offensive line was porous at best.
Yeah.
And he made a lot of throws under pressure, under duress. And we'll talk about the offensive line next. But Indiana's offensive line was very good last year, much improved over the last couple years, and talent wise have gotten better through the portal. So that should give them an opportunity. And then, yeah, you should see Grant Wilson get some reps with the ones just in case.
Hmm.
And now's the time to do it in the spring before reps really become strung out in fall camp. But let's talk about the offensive line. There's a lot of new faces and old faces coming back into the portal on the offensive line. I think the most important piece on that offensive line in the transfer class is Pat Coogan. He really allows you, instead of moving Bray Lynch to center, you could have Bray Lynch move back to guard where he's successful last year. You have Carter Smith anchoring the offensive line as well. Um, Drew Evans, he was not in a boot when they honored him for an academic award at the last basketball game against Penn State, I believe. So that's, I assume, is good news. If
Yep.
you're out of the boot, it's good news. We'll see how much he participates there. He could be at a guard, and then you bring in Khalil Benson and Zen Michalowski to shore up the depth. But to me, Pat Coogan is that glue piece that allows Bray Lynch to go back to guard, and then you could figure out the um, the other tackle position and the other guard position with three players for two spots.
Right. And another piece, Coogan, Mike Kadick exiting, he was a leader in that locker room, a leader on that offensive line. Look, every roster's different, and who's to say that Pat Coogan goes from Notre Dame and immediately is a leader on Indiana? But I would be surprised if that were not the case. He was a leader for Notre Dame. If you don't believe me, just search for Pat Coogan Notre Dame on the internet. You're going to see some of his fiery speeches.
Yeah,
Um, uh, Probably don't do that at work uh, with your speakers on. That might raise some eyebrows. The language there is perhaps not work appropriate, but
no, will
Pat
get us red
Coogan,
flagged here too.
yes, it would. Yeah. Uh, Pat Coogan, a leader, I would expect that to translate to Indiana. Um, so you're right. He allows you to play him at center. That's what he is, and he's a potential all Big Ten center. That's not an exaggeration. Um, that's what he was last year at Notre Dame, was that level of player. I would expect the same under Bob Bostad. Um, I think that the biggest question mark for this team on the offensive line is going to be that right tackle position. Um, I view it as three potential solutions. The most likely and the one that you'd like to have happen is that Bob Bostad is able to get the best out of Zen Michalski, a transfer from Ohio State with a lot of physical tools that just thus far has not, one, he hasn't had a lot of opportunities on the field, and two, he struggled when he was on the field um, in a spotlight situation for Ohio State. So if you can get the most out of those physical tools, he's your starting right tackle. If not, then it becomes what do we do with Khalil Benson? Because I think he's best at guard. So what, but he's capable of playing tackle. So is it we'll kick him out to right tackle and solve that? Or is it, hey, one of our young guys is ready to step up? Most likely player to me in that respect is Austin Barrett. Um, I think that he could be a player that steps in and fills that right tackle spot. That's going to be interesting to see how it starts to play out in the spring. I don't think you're going to get final answers for that, but you're going to tinker around and try and find that best five combination because you do have some guys with versatility. You've got new pieces, you've got a lot of returning pieces that are younger, and you hope continue to develop. Uh, it's a good group. You'll feel better about it going into spring than you have at any point in recent IU football memory. Um, I
Probably
think.
since 2015.
Yeah, yeah.
You know,
But
those Kevin Wilson lines. Outside of that, this is the most comfortable you feel going into a
yes,
season because you do have the depth too.
exactly. And you've got guys you feel good about. You have an offensive line coach you feel really good about and give him the benefit of the doubt with some of these pieces. And I think it's fair to say that you've got a couple of anchors that you don't have any concerns on. You don't have concerns at left tackle at all. Uh, you love Carter Smith, and you don't have a concern at center. You love Pat Coogan, and then you've got enough pieces beyond them that you feel like, hey, I trust this staff to put together a good 7 or 8 guys that you feel good about. And then beyond that, another, 3 or 4 that you're like, hey, those are good development pieces.
Yep, and they're going to be blocking for a new set of running backs. You know, I used running back room last year. You lose Justice Ellison, you lose Tyson Lawton,
Yep.
but it was those guys were very interchangeable. And this year, I think it's a little bit more diverse. You bring in home run hitter Roman Hemby from Maryland. You bring in Lee Beebe from UAB, who kind of fits that bowling ball power back type of runner. Yeah, Kalion Black is back. He in limited playing time last year looked real good. Also was good at JMU. And then
Yep.
you have Kobe Martin, the redshirt freshman who got some run last year in mop up time, and Sean Kono coming in as freshman. But this room,
Mhm.
I think, to me, the strength is that it is more diverse. You have a Roman Hemby in both the passing and running game
Yep.
can take it to the house from anywhere on the field. And IU knows that firsthand after last year. I think it was like an 80-yard touchdown run or 75-yard touchdown run. Um, as Alex said, the referee made a great block, but he still outran the defense.
Yes.
Um, and I think that's the as good as Ellison was, as good as Lawton was, that was kind of the missing dimension of that running back room was the guy you could hand the ball off and boom, flip the field on one play.
Yep. Interesting if you look at Fernando Mendoza um, with Cal, Jaden Ott in 2023. Last year he struggled with injuries, but in 2023, really good pass catcher that they used a lot out of the backfield. Um, it would not surprise me at all if Mike Shanahan was studying some Cal film from 2023 and looking at how they utilized Jaden Ott with Fernando Mendoza, talking to Mendoza about what made that work, what were you comfortable with the in those formations and those plays. I think you could see some of that with Roman Hemby and Lee Beebe. He was a pretty good pass catcher at UAB as well. Um, I think that BB and Kalon Black um, fit your more physical run style that you had a season ago. I think that they line up pretty well and would be considered interchangeable with each other. Um, BB, I think, is a better pass catcher than Black has shown to be, but Himby offers, like you said, that home run threat that maybe wasn't there last year. Um, while not being quite as physical of a runner. At least he wasn't at Maryland. That's not to say he can't, you know, run with that edge in Indiana. Um, I I think that the best part about this backfield, I think, is the fact that it's deep. We know how running backs can get beat up, and I made this prediction in my running back preview. I do think that you're going to have 3 Indiana running backs that go over 500 yards, um, which they were close to doing. Let me pull up here the stats for last year. Um,
I
so
have him
Indiana had
here.
Ellison at 848, Lawton at 666, 668, Black at 251, and Green at 201. So I think you're going to see, just in terms of rushing yards, I think it's going to be more of a three-way split instead of a two-way because you had really it was Ellison and Lawton both above 140 carries. Ellison with the slight advantage. I think he was up by like 20 carries on the season. Um, so, but it was primarily a two-man backfield, and then Black was used, I don't want to say sparingly, but significantly less. I think you're going to see a three-way split between uh, between Hemby, Lee Beebe, and Kalon Black, and then you will see a significant drop off to that fourth, fifth guy, whether that's Kobe Martin or Sean Quono getting probably 4 games, and then redshirting would probably be the plan for him. Uh, but that's the kind of the change that I see happening is more kind of opportunities for catching passes out of the backfield for IU's running backs this coming season, and I think more of a three running back split between Beebe, Hemby, and Kalon Black. But it's a good group. I think it is right there with last year's in terms of talent. I think you can make a, you know, easy case that uh, Hemby and Ellison are very comparable in terms of talent. Uh, Lawton and Beebe, very comparable, and then Kalon Black, back maybe another year a little bit better as he progresses. So I think no concerns on that front that the running backs are going to be just about what you saw last year.
Yeah, and Solomon Ben Horse is surprisingly back for what, an eighth season.
That's
I
true.
thought he
And
was
you're looking
done.
at him at special teams, right? I mean, we're looking at primarily the fair catch kickoffs.
Yeah, which is very shocking when we do our special teams preview. That'll be talked about, but yeah, maybe a change up back here and there. But yeah, he still gives you somebody that has 8 years of college experience. God forbid you're down to that number of running backs, but somebody you could trust a little bit to give the ball and maybe make somebody miss. He was an all conference kick returner, so if you could
Yeah,
get him the ball in space, he could make a play. But yeah, Solomon Van Horst rejoins that room as well. Wide receivers, Indiana's coming back. I think this is the year that they're going to get another 1,000 yard receiver. You bring back Eliza Surratt, Omar Cooper, and EJ Williams is coming back. If he's
yeah,
if he's healthy, that I think that makes that room so much better. You saw him come along late in the year in 2023. He had a really nice big catch against Northwestern late in that game last year, and before he enters the portal. Obviously left on good terms, and him and Kirk Signetti were on the same page. Um, he could have contributed last year, but he wanted to be 100% and be a major contributor this year. You also add a whole bunch of talent to that room, too, in terms of Tyler Morris from Michigan, kind of gives you that Miles Price type of guy. And you have, was it Michael Williams? Is it? You have the kid from
Mackay
Makai Williams
Jackson.
or sorry, Makai Jackson from
Yeah,
Appalachian State, and then Charlie Becker, who's actually a sophomore. I didn't realize he played 12 games last year
yeah,
until I looked at the stats. But mainly on special teams, he's a
yes,
guy I know the coaching staff likes a lot. Into that room, and then you know, another year of Omar Cooper and Eliza Surratt make that room really dangerous. Omar Cooper had a really, really good year last year. He, well, he didn't have as many catches as Surratt. He became the go-to big play guy when teams would double Surratt or
yeah,
trying to take him out of the game. He made a great touchdown catch against Michigan. Great touchdown against Notre Dame as well. came up with some big catches for IU and some big games. So the wide receiver rooms, it's a little different than last year, but I don't think the production goes down. Now there's probably more. Tyler Morris only had 200 yards rushing or receiving, but that was in an offense that didn't have a quarterback. What is he going to do
Yep.
in an offense with a capable quarterback? Same with Mekhi Jackson and things like that. And then you got to have some of these young guys step up as well.
Yeah, I think, and we always have to look at when you're looking at who's starting, receiver is a ton of rotation, right? But
Yep.
when you look at who's starting, Indiana primarily operated out of three wide receiver sets with a tight end and a running back. That was their base offense. Certainly did a lot of different things, but their base offense was three wide receivers. I don't see any reason that'll change. So you're looking at two obvious ones, Surratt and Cooper. Obvious. Those two, as I wrote in my wide receiver preview, they're written in permanent marker. You know, um, beyond that comes into a question of at the slot, you have to find a replacement for Miles Price, who did a lot of great things. You have to find a replacement for Keyshawn Williams.
Yep.
Um, I think that Tyler Morris on paper fits the best, just in terms of skill set. What you don't know is whether or not his lack of numbers, his lack of production is nearly entirely because of the system he was in and the quarterback play he had at Michigan, or if Tyler Morris just isn't that good. We don't know. He has shown flashes when given the opportunity, and he's certainly moving into a much better system, but that's a question that the coaches are going to have to find out. Clearly, they think that it's the latter, that in this system he's going to be able to produce, or they wouldn't bring him in.
Right. And then you have LeBron Bond coming in, who
Yeah,
might come up. He's super quick, is
he's going
in
to have a
that.
role.
He will have a role. And we saw it last year where, Omar Cooper would have a big game one game, and then
Yeah,
you kind of forget he's on the field the next game. But Surratt would have a big game. Then Miles Price would have a big game. Then Keyshawn Williams would have there are going to be 4 or 5 guys who go, wow, they have all big, they have a big game here and there. LeBron Bond could come in and, I mean, steal that role from Tyler Morris.
yeah. Bond is a player that I think the most likely outcome, and you've got to be careful because if you're not going to utilize him much, you don't want to burn a year.
Correct.
But he has the type of quickness that he is capable of having, say, 15 catches during the course of a season, average 24, 25 yards a catch, because a few of those 12 catches, he breaks for 75 yards.
Yeah. And
You
that's
know,
that's
and that
that's what
and
you
it
have
it
to weigh.
yeah, yeah, we
It's
don't know.
kind of
We don't know how
yeah,
that's going to happen. Davion Chandler, another Lawrence North product coming in. He's another burner, not as fast as LeBron Bond, but he's bigger than Bond. He's, right in that Omar Cooper mold. Then Miles Kendrick from Florida as well. Chandler and Kendrick, they don't have that just complete blazing speed, and they're more outside guys,
yep,
boundary receivers, which Indiana has more of. Um, the slot is the one that they enter the spring kind of looking for an answer. Certainly a lot of potential options there. Two players that I think are being overlooked. Charlie Becker, he's 6'4". I know the coaches think very highly of his
they love
potential.
him.
Um, it- you've got him as an outside guy. He's 6'4", potentially a major red zone threat. Who knows? But the second guy that I think is getting overlooked is Mekhi Jackson. I view him very much like a Keyshawn Williams. I think
Little bigger.
he can play in the slot. I mean, in terms of role, he can play in the slot, he can play on the outside. In four wide receiver sets, I think he makes a ton of sense as one of the inside receivers. Um, on a four wide receiver set, if you've got Surratt and Cooper on the outside, and then you put Morris and Jackson as two of the inside guys, or you put three big receivers out there, put EJ Williams, put Charlie Becker, and you've got Mekhi Jackson, kind of on the inside as a quasi slot guy. He's not a burner necessarily, but he's quick, he's shifty, runs good routes, and he's been productive at every level that he's been at. Started at St. Francis, the same school that Elijah Surratt did. They were teammates at St. Francis, which is wild to think about. Two guys that were at St. Francis in Pennsylvania and now are playing at IU together. That's a cool story. Um, he was a very productive player against good teams, and he closed the season on fire. His last few games were, above 150 yards a game. So I think that the potential is really there for Mekhi Jackson to carve out a very nice role. Um, I do think that you're going to have to get EJ Williams. I wrote in my preview the operative word for EJ Williams so far in his collegiate career is if. If EJ Williams is healthy, then he could be this. Hopefully this year is the year that he can be healthy. Clearly, he's a well-liked guy in the locker room, or he wouldn't have been able to come back. Clearly, he's a well-liked guy by the coaching staff, and clearly they believe he can have an impact for us, or
Yep.
they wouldn't have brought him back.
Or
So,
they wouldn't have had him go to the transfer portal either, because if he had stayed, Kirk Cignetti was going to play him because he had a role on that team, but he
yeah,
wanted to be 100%. And look, not all the injuries are his fault. He had broke his finger on somebody's helmet, which is a
yeah,
total freak accident.
yeah,
But yeah, his injury history is, again, if he stays healthy, we've seen what he could do against Illinois, Purdue, Michigan State, Wisconsin, down the stretch in 2023. He can change games. Finally, tight end. IU loses Zach Horton, who's the heart and soul of the offense. And when you talk about football dudes, Zach Horton was a football dude. He Every time he saw a linebacker on the ground for the defense, for opposing defenses, probably Zach Horton who put him there. Um, he made key catches in some games, some big touchdown catches as well. He played on special teams, but he graduates. IU brings in the number one transfer tight end in Holden Stays. You also get the H back from Wisconsin, who's played tight end, who's played fullback, and Riley Nikowski. I think if you mash those two guys together, you probably have Zach Horton with a little bit of a bigger play potential.
hmm
Um, those two, they're good blockers, they're tough guys. Um, Stays is probably your bigger play tight end, and we'll see how that plays in this offense. But you also, I mean, that's a position where production wasn't necessarily seen in the box score. They don't have a box score for just absolutely pounding defensive linemen and and linebackers as a blocker. So what's your take on tight end before we get out of here?
Yeah, replacing Horton, you're right. It's not going to be, well, if this guy can get 20 catches and this guy can get 10, and together they can score five touchdowns, then there we go. We did it. That doesn't even come close to measuring the impact that Zach Horton had for the offense as a leader and as a blocker. I do like the players that they went out to get because I think that they have a clear role that they do fill, and that's Malvers as blockers. Nowakowski in particular, known as a high-end blocker, His PFF grade's really good as a blocker. Uh, some of that, is take it or leave it with those PFF grades on blocking for tight ends because you don't really know what they were supposed to be doing on that play. But uh, football people smarter than me think he's really good at blocking, so I'll take their word for it. Uh, Holden Stays, another one, known as a really good blocker. He does have the look and athleticism of a high end tight end. Sam West is, you hope, Indiana hopes can develop into a big play tight end, more of at this point in his career, certainly more of a pass catcher than he has been a blocker. So he offers a different dimension, perhaps, to that room. And then James Bamba, more of that blocker and possession receiver. And then the two freshmen, Blake Theory and Andrew Barker. I think that the coaching staff is really high on both of their futures, but those two, unless there's injuries, those two are going to redshirt. Those two are going to play 4 games and redshirt. And then you're looking for the other four, particularly this spring, to see, okay, what can we do with what we have? How can we utilize the skills that Sam West has? How can we get the most out of Holden Stays? How can we use kind of the interesting H-back, role that Riley Nowakowski had, which IU didn't really have last season. They didn't have that in their offense. They still might not. They might just be moving him to a glorified, extra blocker in certain run-heavy situations. Don't know, but I think it's a room that gives Mike Shanahan flexibility with how to use them, and I think that that'll be the interesting part to see how they're deployed.
Yeah, definitely. It's a room with a lot of depth, a lot of potential, and a lot of talent in both blocking and in the pass catching game. But I use offense, finished second in the Big Ten in points scored. They should be right up there in the top 5 of the Big Ten again next year.
Yeah.
If everything goes to plan and stays healthy. So that does it for our offensive preview. Thank you for joining us, TJ. You can read TJ's running back preview on HoosierHuddle.com now. It posted today. And his wide receiver preview is coming out shortly, as well as my quarterback preview. We'll have all the positions previewed at HoosierHuddle.com. You can follow us at Hoosier_Huddle on X, at HoosierHuddle.BSky on Blue Sky, and then as always on Facebook, and wherever you get your podcast. So thank you for listening. Spring practice again starts on Saturday, March 8th, and finishes up on Saturday, April 19th at noon in their spring game in Memorial Stadium. So thank you for listening. We'll be back next week to talk defense.